You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Here's Kevin. Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.
When we put together an SOW or proposal for a client, every single member that is working on that proposal is personally responsible for putting their estimates in. And then if they misestimate their component, they are personally accountable to deliver against it, whether they misquote or not. Now, in our model, our economics, we disproportionately reward people for accepting that level of risk. So we almost think of ourselves like everyone is an entrepreneur in Chameleon Collective. You say, hey, you want the upside? We're going to pay you more than anyone else pays out in the market. But if you want that, you can't just skip the downside. The downside is personal, you have to be personally accountable and you've got to deliver on whatever you basically said you were going to do. And so what I find is now when we go out there and we put these deals together, we'll go back to that one we mentioned a second ago, no one on our team would kind of lowball their component because they know they're going to be personally accountable for it. I think there is a distrust of consultants. I think there's a distrust of agency culture. It's one of the reasons I think there's been some struggles in our industry. And I think that we really as an industry need to work hard so that people don't distrust us. It hurts all of us, I think, when people do these kind of tactics and it's why we're now seeing this shift in the way that clients are engaging experts and talent. a WPP or a Publicis or an Omnicom, they use the network of of their shops to effectively always have an answer for a client. Client calls in, I don't have that guy for you, but I can get to that guy in our network and or that person in our network, and I'm going to bring them in. And they use that to beat up on the smaller shops to great competitive advantage. And by the way, good for them. That's the business model. I think this does the same thing with technology. It says, hey, look, how can potentially independents or even smaller holding companies use this technology to remove the friction between their shops and be more competitive because you always can find the right person to do the job. You can say yes to more client work, so you become the single source of trust for your clients. And you can share opportunities. It makes it a lot easier to kind of grow and scale the business.
Right.
And I think when you think about partnership development, the one thing that no one wants is, you end up with these, let's say you've got 10 companies that you've signed, strategic alliances with, and you're like saying, hey, we're gonna do referral agreements, we're gonna work on things together. But because you can't really see into the roster, you can kind of have a high level concept of what that partner does. Every time an opportunity comes in, and if you're a professional business development person, that could be multiple things a day. You're not going to alert your whole partner network about, I've got this opportunity. Have you got any cards to play? Because what's going to happen? Every single one of us do the same thing. Oh, so and so cool and great. Could we hop on a phone call for half an hour and talk about it? What I need is 10 more 30-minute meetings a day, like a hole in the head. You know what I mean? And so I love this idea that you don't have to, reach out to them or kind of tell the network. You can pre-qualify them, and you might only ping one or two of them and say, guys, hey, this great opportunity came in. I've noticed you have a ton of experience in, automotive, and you've got some great people in the specifically around experience design or something. Can we schedule half an hour and talk about? I want to talk about this opportunity. So it's a really efficient way of leveraging your partnerships to drive growth. Some people may think that AI is a hype bubble. I actually want to tell people that I actually think it's underhyped. And I don't, and I think that there is a healthy amount of this technology that is will kind of turn you into a superhuman. I do think that everyone in our industry needs to, basically immerse themselves in this technology, whether you are a creative person, whether you're a writer, whether you're a biz dev person or an account person. Um, I think I simultaneously I want to acknowledge that I'm actually scared about the long-term impact of how this is going to impact jobs and employment. One of the things that concerns me the most is, we're seeing a lot of shifts with our clients, and even our own behavior, where we're able to use AI technologies for what would effectively replace, like, lower grade employees. But, for those of us who've come up through the industry over the last couple of decades, I had to do that work at one point in my career because that's how I got to this point of my career. And I'm really concerned about what happens when, everyone's go, well, just have the AI do it. Well, how do the people go, get to the mid grade and the upper grade if we're giving all the low grade work to some AI tech?
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the e-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited to have Freddie Laker on today because we've been traveling in the same ecosystem for many years and known each other for longer than I care to admit. But he's got a new thing cooking, Collective OS. So I wanted to first delve into what the catalyst was, Freddie, for you taking sort of the concept of Chameleon Collective and systematizing it into Collective OS.
Yeah, I think having a little bit of understanding of how I even got to this place will help people, I think, understand this product that we've been developing called Collective OS. It wasn't an overnight journey. It was something that I think really happened, to me over quite a few years. And but I think it's inspired by a real need that I see in this industry that I love and have worked in with for so many years now. Um, I guess it would be 9 years ago next month, I founded a company called Chameleon Collective. And what's unusual about Chameleon Collective is it is a true collective. And I think when I say a true collective, because a lot of people, I think, have kind of hijacked the collective name because it's got a nice ring to it. And a lot of times that means like, hey, it's Freddie and Friends on LinkedIn, but we're not really a company, but we'll say we're a collective, we're a couple of people, and we pull our buddies in when we need them, right? But Chameleon Collective is a true collective in the sense that it is owned by the people in the collective. It is a real company with, I think about 140 or so fully dedicated team members. We got about 150 contractors doing, tens and tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue, and working for, a very wide range of companies. But it has a lot of interesting ways that it works. So first off, it has a decentralized leadership structure. So the members of the collective kind of help guide where the business is going as a group. It has a distributed technology platform that allows all these individuals that are within inside the collective to operate as one single unified group. And we use that to, kind of attack the market with great effect. And if you really think about, I guess, what Chameleon Collective is on some level, it's a system of unified brands, to unified technologies, systems, and processes that allowed all these individuals basically to create this, highly competitive group. And actually, we're, been on the Inc. 5000 the last 3 years in a row. So it's a very competitive company, and I'm very bullish on the concept of collectives. In fact, I happen to be writing a book about it right now called Collective Capitalism. And so if you were to manifest all this into a piece of technology, this thinking, it would become this platform we've been working on called Collective OS, where I'm got a wonderful partner called Jason Flack, who's the CEO of Collective OS and really leading the charge on this. But what this tool does is, if you have an agency or a professional services firm, you basically can kind of add all of your talent, which again, if you could argue that people are the product in a professional services firm. So you add all of your talent, add all of your case studies, add all of your clients. And then let's say hypothetically, Boeing calls in. You can very quickly say, okay, who have we got in aviation? You've added a little filter and you can say, okay, here's all the people we've got in aviation. Here's all the clients we've ever worked for in aviation. Here's all the case studies we have in aviation. And then maybe you say, well, what about that plus, brand strategy? And that might filter things down again. And that on its own, that's a pretty powerful, useful tool if you're running a professional services company. But its killer feature is the ability to create collectives. So let's use Did It as an example. So let's say hypothetically, you guys are running it and Chameleon Collective is running it. I've got my people, case studies, and clients in it. You've got your people, case studies, and clients in it. And the idea is you can create a bridge between our two companies, a collective. And I could go into my back end and say, you know what, share all these people with Kevin. And you could go on your side, share all these people and case studies on my side with Freddie. And the idea is the next time a client calls in, I will actually see maybe potentially people from your roster that I can leverage. Now, it's not a marketplace, it's not Upwork or something like that. I can't just like hire people. That's obviously not something we're looking for as professional services company operators. But what it would do is allow us to build better partnerships. So effectively, it's partnership technology. And I would argue when I, first started talking about this, it's not quite as revolutionary as you think on some level. There's a precedent for this. It's the holding companies. It's the fact that a WPP or a Publicis or an Omnicom, they use the network of their shops to effectively always have an answer for a client. Client calls in, I don't have that guy for you, but I can get to that guy in our network or that person in our network, and I'm going to bring them in. And they use that to beat up on the smaller shops to great competitive advantage. And by the way, good for them. That's the business model. I think this does the same thing with technology. It says, hey, look, how can potentially independents or even smaller holding companies use this technology to remove the friction between their shops and be more competitive, because you always can find the right person to do the job. You can say yes to more client work, so you become the single source of trust for your clients. And you can share opportunities. It makes it a lot easier to kind of grow and scale the business. So I'm really, really bullish on this. I think it's just an incredibly exciting piece of technology.
Likewise, I mean, what's interesting about it is I don't think that the holding companies only always execute in the vision that you just
For
described.
sure.
I've seen situations where, due to internal politics, actually that doesn't end up necessarily happening. But
I
one
agree
of
with
the
that.
areas that's most fascinating, I think, is that during your journey at Chameleon Collective, this concept of DAOs, which are this idea of a collective meritocracy, within the blockchain, have sort of matriculated, but not necessarily been executed on perfectly, but at least conceptually, this idea of the meritocracy where the cream rises to the top and then is put to work in such a way that everyone benefits, but proportionally to
Yeah.
their level of skill and their level of participation. I actually find that that's really interesting because, DAOs may have already jumped the shark. I'm not really sure because there haven't been any effective ones, but at least in theory, the concept behind a DAO is interesting. And I think that's why Collective OS is interesting, because, one of the reasons that it will participate is this, that idea of there will be assets, HR, human capital assets within that collective that we might not otherwise have in our sort of freelance Rolodex, right? And being able to find them and put them to use, I think, is super exciting as somebody who's gone through the journey of being a SaaS company back into the agency business, which I left when I started Did It initially. So there are sort of unique challenges, I think, that marketers face now that they didn't face 5, 10 years ago. And how do you feel like the Collective OS potentially helps those marketers, through the individuals, through the whole, agencies that are participating in it? How does it help them solve problems that are uniquely new to marketing, as opposed to the sort of problems they've always had?
Yeah. I think it depends on the size of the organization. So what we're noticing is we're seeing more and more agencies and consulting firms start spinning up the Collective OS tech, is that when you're a smaller shop, so let's say sub, 40 people, something like that, it's pretty easy, to kind of have a good grasp on who your team is. People kind of go, client calls in, you say, look, I need this. someone thinks about it for a minute and goes, oh yeah, that's Bob. Bob's an imaginary guy I like to talk about a lot. And they might send the work to Bob. And I think people, at that size, they tend to be pretty specialized. And whether it's a marketing firm or whatever their specialization might be, they're probably going to operate within the confines of that group normally, right? At the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got firms when they start getting 50, 100, 150 people. It's really hard to understand who's on your roster anymore. And I used to joke that the beginning of Chameleon Collective, before we started building the earliest stages of this technology, used to operate on a tech called Freddie 3000. And that basically meant you would Slack me and say, I need someone that does this, like kind of like that's Steve, call Steve or Sue or whatever it was, and I'd kind of point you in someone's direction. And so but still, even then, you're still kind of limited by the scale of like your own operation. And so what I find is so interesting when you start really kind of like, opening the aperture and building these network effects, the kinds of solutions that you might come up with as a marketer isn't limited by your own world anymore. And so, I can think of some very specific examples where, a client had called in recently, and we've built large networks of firms using Collective OS that we now leverage to great effect. And actually, as I was looking at potential solutions for a client when they called in, I started getting exposed to talent that was beyond my own walls, and that actually inspired new types of thinking because I was like, oh man, I never even thought about going down that path. Here's this particular guy, who I'm connected to through a network, maybe whether that's experiential or there happens to be a shop that I know leverages Collective OS that's hyper specialized in mixed reality and augmented reality and virtual reality, kind of development. That's not something we kept inside our castle walls. And for that very reason, also, I started maybe thinking about new things that I could offer because I may not have brought them up before because I just didn't know how to get to that kind of skill or that kind of expertise.
Yeah, another thing that I find really interesting about it, and we'll have to see how it ends up evolving as an alternative, is one of the reasons did it made its first acquisition of Inceptor back, whatever it was, 12, 13, 14 years ago, was because we had clients asking for things that we didn't do. And we had a sort of a catch-22 because I couldn't hire the person till I had enough client demand to support that individual, right? And so the way I solved it was to buy an agency that had some overlap with us, but also had some unique service offerings, and of course came with revenue at the same time, right? And over the years, when did it made 11 acquisitions, two of them went extremely badly, right? One of them went particularly badly. And of course, that's just, luck of the draw or, bad due diligence or whatever it is. But, not every M&A deal goes well. And, I was using the M&A deal to solve that problem, right? So we bought 3 PR agencies, we bought 2 creative shops, we bought some additional talent in as a result of social media expertise, et cetera. And sometimes it works great, swimmingly well, and sometimes it doesn't. But I really, I'm interested to see how Collective OS allows me to solve that problem in a much more flexible way, right? Where I don't have to do that, and I don't have to sort of cat herd freelancers who perhaps I haven't worked with before and have no history with at the same time. So that's sort of the exciting thing to me, is this idea that it solves the problem in a very different way.
Yeah, the big shift I think we've all seen in the industry over certainly the last 10 years and even more so in the last 5 years is, people are building everything in these hybrid models now. And so it's less full-time employees, more contractors, not because of an unwillingness to support full-time employees or anything like that. I think it's actually just the needs of clients are getting so complex that you may need to have a kind of a shifting need of specialists, because there is such a high specialist culture in this industry, where people say, look, it doesn't make sense for me to full-time staff someone because in 3 months I may need a different set of specialists. The problem that you start running into, and I think you noted a second ago, is like the freelancer market. Again, there's some wonderful, wonderful people out there, but especially if you're out there and you don't feel like you get to the right people, you start I think the first thing everyone starts doing is first thing you do, you start trolling LinkedIn. You're like, I must know someone out in the industry, right? And so you start like digging into your LinkedIn and you can't find that person. And then if you're really, really desperate, you end up on some of these freelancer platforms. And like, well, this guy's got 27 5-star ratings. I just don't know who the hell gave him those ratings, you know? And I think the thing I like about the way Collective OS works is it's still a trust-based platform, but the concept is like, okay, you know, Kevin, if they're guy, I'll use you as again an example. Like if they're on your roster, I know you don't hire Yahoos. And so if they're on your, I don't need a 5-star rating to know someone that did it is good because I know that you screen them. And I also know if there's an issue, I can contact you. And so kind of instead of it being more like a totally decentralized kind of freelancer pool kind of concept, it's more like nodes. So there's pools of talent you can access, but they're behind trusted sources of people that you know actually want to work with and that you may know. And because there would be trust between some of the leaders in these firms, I find that's a much better way to source
Right.
talent. I do want to note to jump back to something you said earlier. I thought was really interesting. You touched on DAOs, and for those of the listening who are not nearly as geeky as Kevin and I, that's stands for a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and
Yeah.
it's basically a company that uses the blockchain to kind of like does control and manage the company. And so, if you think about what blockchain is, it's effectively a governance model. It's a system for saying, hey, there's rules, and when information or data or even money moves from node point to point, there's a standardized set of rules that we run it on. That's actually how Chameleon Collective works. You know, it's a system is that we're based on a giant governance model. And I have to be honest in saying, because I, like you, suffer from a addiction to new technologies and so on, I almost pushed the collective to rebuild on as a DAO when I saw the tech. I'm like, oh, this is so cool, so amazing. Mercifully, everyone talked me down and said, well, why? Because we actually figured out how to do the whole concept without the tech, and it's just good
Right.
contract operating agreements. And we kind of avoided going down that path, which I think would have been a bit of a, I love this word, by the way, a boondoggle for us. I've fallen in love with boondoggle again. I said it again 3 months ago. I'm like, this is my new favorite word. So I'm glad we podcast.
I, I I almost made the same decision because I was trying to decide what to do with the e-marketing association,
Yeah,
and I was thinking about the idea of hyperlocal chapters,
yeah.
each of whom I would not know necessarily the level to which it would contribute to the whole. And I was thinking to myself, oh well, a DAO system would automatically reward proportionally to the level that
Oh, I love it.
they put in, right? And then the more I thought about it, and the more I looked into DAOs that are actually been executed against, the less I found any success stories. And I said, I don't need the blockchain, right, to
Yeah,
do
yeah,
this.
yeah,
And
yeah.
to try to think through every potential scenario and put it into smart contracts. It just didn't seem like it was feasible, right? It's just too many moving pieces to do that.
It's a great example of like easy to get lost in the tech and not focus on the business. So keep it simple, stupid, whatever you want to call it. You know,
Yeah.
it's the way. So, but but you get bonus points for doing a DAO shout out.
Right. So to play devil's advocate, right? One of the other challenges as an agency executive team is sort of managing human capital is this idea that, well, when we do use any freelance-ish kind of talent, right? Our margin per hour drops in exchange for the flexibility of not having somebody on payroll and not having to pay for unutilized hours. We're paying more for the hours we are using, and finding that sweet spot, finding that balance is key, right? But it's not always a no-brainer to figure that out. So for those folks who potentially will push back on the collective OS concept, right? How do you address that concern? Like, well, yeah, I mean, there is some amazing talent in these nodes and individually, but on a per hour basis, I'm going to be paying 30, 35, 40% more.
Great question. I would say figure out what your bread and butter is. And so if you can, as a business owner or manager or operator, business development person, whatever someone's role might be within the organization, look, if you can keep people at 70 to 80% utilization 365, 24/7, whatever you want to call it, great. You should absolutely hire those people. And if you've got 100% confidence in that, then that's going to be the high margin part of your business that really like powers you through. But if you look at a particular skill and you're like, you can't do that, and you can only keep them at 50% utilization or lower, you should absolutely not hire those people. And it's far better to only make, 10% or 15% on them, but completely de-risk that part of the business. And I think, most people will go through and they're going to figure what that is. And a lot of that, funny enough, has to do with the network and the relationships you built through your career. There's going to be people out there who said, a small tangent, but I think when you think about like when people start a professional services firm, most people don't go out and say, I want to start a professional services firm. What happens is you're good at one thing and you're so good at it that you get so much business, you end up hiring another person that does it. And then you're like, and you end up hiring another person does it. And then about 20 people in, you're like, what the hell? I don't do the thing I'm awesome at anymore. And I manage all these other people. And you're not, and I think there's a big inflection point of people trying to figure out if that's where they want to keep going. But anyway, the point I think is like, if you came up through video production or motion graphics or something, you probably have a ton of relationships there. People know you for that. You can probably keep a ton of people busy that do that. But every once in a while, you might run into something that's like, hey, there's a growth marketing component of this where people say, hey, I want to drive, leads or traffic or whatever it is to, to that, maybe that video that your team created. You probably can't keep those people busy all day. That is a great example of where you should have a network. And the reality is people do have those partnerships today. People say, oh, I've got these strategic alliance with, my friend Chuck, and he's got this growth agency over here, and I've got, say, with my friend Sue, and she's got this PR shop over here. The problem that we were seeing, and I want to be clear, I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else. I just kind of forgot all the people I had partnerships with, or I just couldn't remember who I signed the agreements with, or maybe I'd remember them, but there's other people in Chameleon Collective who drive business relationships, and they had no idea we were even in these partnerships, and so is very much kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. And so by kind of fully integrating the partnerships actually into the way that you look for talent and solutions within your own organization, it pushes them right up top of mind. And since we've been using the technology, just the number of deals that we've been not only being brought into, but also just sending to our partners, because I was like, man, I totally forgot. My favorite one recently, some client called in. And it was we work with a lot of private equity firms, venture capital firms. It's really cracked me up. They were talking to me. I never know what's going to happen when a PE firm calls, like what kind of portfolio company they're going to talk about. And they started asking me if I had any experts around nanotube technology. And so I'm looking at them, but I'm actually Googling nanotube technology because I have no idea what they're talking about in the meeting. And figure out what it was. I'm like, okay. And I thought, there's no way we have this person. Got into Collective OS. Yeah, I found a guy who'd had a history in nanotube marketing. Couldn't believe it. I would have never known that if the system wasn't there. So, it's delivered some wins in some really surprising ways that make me giggle, frankly.
Yeah, that's a fun story, and that brings us to another question, which is how do you envision business development teams at agencies leveraging the OS in such a way that it increases their win rate and actually allows, because the win rate is sort of hypothetically at least directly proportional to your ability to service the client and delight them, right?
Mhm.
So to the extent that the additional talent, human capital within the collective OS allows an agency to do that. Do you have any stories yet as to how it's helped agencies win business just as a result of being able to tap into the nanotube guy or somebody else like that?
Yeah, I can tell you about the logic that we're seeing people using with the system, right? So if you're in business development and you're in a pitch scenario, you're evaluating a whole lot of different factors, right? So if you've got a really, really good relationship, then you may be able to kind of work with the team you've got within your own shop because you feel like, hey, I can win this because at the end of the day, I've got a deep relationship. But if you don't have a deep relationship and you know you're going to be highly scrutinized, then you've always got to put your all your best pieces forward, right? And I'd say that there may be times when someone starts to self-evaluate their own roster and say, look, it's like if you're playing cards, you're kind of like, have I got a good hand right now? Can I win with this hand? And you might say, look, I've got in my hand, I've got three really great people, and I've got two people that even maybe a little bit of a stretch. They probably got some of the requirements. It's not misrepresenting them or anything like that, but it's not the strongest hand. And I think you can then use Collective OS basically to identify people across the network. And so what I'm seeing in pitches that we're involved in with some of our partners, like I don't want to directly mention, but where either they're contacting us or we're contacting them and saying, look, I've got four of the five people we need to win this business. I noticed you've got, person X on your roster who's got incredibly relevant industry experience and decades of great case studies and examples of work. Could we talk about how we can either subcontract that person or could we co-pitch? And absolutely, that's created opportunities. There's just honestly, not as it created winning opportunities, it's created opportunities of just things I would have just turned it down. You wouldn't even tried to have won it.
Right.
And I think when you think about partnership development, the one thing that no one wants is, you end up with these, let's say you've got 10 companies that you've signed, strategic alliances with, and you're like saying, hey, we're going to do referral agreements, we're going to work on things together. But because you can't really see into the roster, you can kind of have a high level concept of what that partner does. Every time an opportunity comes in, and if you're a professional business development person, that could be multiple things a day. You're not going to alert your whole partner network about, I've got this opportunity. Have you got any cards to play? Because what's going to happen? Every single one of us do the same thing. Oh, so and so cool and great. Could we hop on a phone call for half an hour and talk about it? What I need is 10 more 30-minute meetings a day, like a hole in the head. You know what I mean? And so I love this idea that you don't have to, reach out to them or kind of tell the network. You can pre-qualify them, and you might only ping one or two of them and say, guys, hey, this great opportunity came in. I've noticed you have a ton of experience in, automotive, and you've got some great people specifically around experience design or something. Can we schedule half an hour and talk about? I want to talk about this opportunity. So it's a really efficient way of leveraging your partnerships to drive growth.
So I'll put the potential client of the agency hat on for the moment, and I think a lot of brand side or marketer side folks have this sort of fear, and it's particularly something that they fear with the larger and agency holding company type agencies. But I think it's a general fear as well, which is the idea that there's like the biz dev team, and then there's the team you get, right?
Yeah.
This idea that the rug is pulled out from under them because they don't end up getting the people that were part of the pitch. So how does Collective OS sort of assure that that's less likely to happen? And obviously there's no guarantees, right? Because there's no guarantees that a person doesn't get a new job or get overwhelmed or whatever. But there is that fear at the client side, which is, okay, yeah, this nanotube guy is exactly who we need. And yet we'll probably only need 10 hours a month of nanotube expertise, right? But we want to make sure that we can get that 10 hours, because if we sign the annual agreement and then the nanotube guy disappears, what do I do now?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm going to answer it in a way that you've made me think about something I haven't thought about in a long time. I think this is a fair concern that clients have. But at Chameleon Collective, so again, I'm celebrating my nine-year anniversary next month. I can't believe it. But we don't have pitch teams. So I like, basically, we don't even have account people actually in our model. And we don't even have a formal business development function. All of our kind of partner level people generate opportunities and so on, but we're also the people that work on the work. So the idea of of kind of swapping that is something I actually haven't thought about in a long time. But I'd say at the end of the day, it's less of a technology issue, and that's more of a cultural issue. I think the individual technical firms that potentially could use Collective OS, I think they ultimately have to choose to not subscribe to the concept of pitch teams, and I do think that just as a general feeling, I don't think that is not good for our industry. I think that's something I would say just as as someone, for people who may not be familiar with what Chameleon Collective does, one of the key things we have is we've got about 45 interim or fractional leaders. And so we have all these CMOs and chief revenue officers and chief digital officers, VPs of e-commerce and things like that. And we tend to operate, with a lot of investors. And so it gives us a really unique perspective because while we may be consultants or a marketing services firm, simultaneously, we're also the client. It's a little strange because we frequently sit in these C-suite roles within these portfolio companies. Even though we're external firm, we're also an internal firm, thus the Chameleon part of Chameleon Collective. So it gives us this really interesting perspective. And I think this is one of the things that we see is that there's over the last, I've certainly seen it get worse over the last 10 years. I think there is a distrust of consultants. I think there's a distrust of agency culture. It's one of the reasons I think there's been some struggles in our industry. And I think that we really as an industry need to work hard so that people don't distrust us. It hurts all of us, I think, when people do these kind of tactics and it's why we're now seeing this shift in the way that clients are engaging experts and talent.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring it up, and I was thinking about how our business development process has changed over the years, and how I now typically will almost refuse to close the business on my own because I do want the client to meet the team they'll be working with, right?
Yeah.
They'll get a little slice of my time. That's just part of the quid pro quo of working with Did It, right? Is you get a little piece of Kevin at least, probably somewhat proportional to fee revenue, but not necessarily. Depending on how much I like you and I like your business, you might get a little bit more. But the importance of having them meet their day to day, right, is really important. How do you see that sort of manifesting itself when folks are going to be sort of either co-pitching or a Chameleon OS individual is part of the business development process because they'll be an important integral part of the post-close business?
Yeah, I still think it comes down to the culture, right? I mean, a well-designed deal, whether that is a team that comes entirely from within your organization, or that's a team that's assembled from multiple organizations. These deals have to be structured well. People have to be staffed properly. One of the ways that can drive the wrong behavior is people underbid the components to win the deal. So they'll put someone's name on the project. Yes, they'll have some billable hours, but they won't have enough. And then the client gets frustrated because they don't feel they're engaged. But actually, it wasn't even the team member's fault. It was whoever structured the deal just doing whatever they had to do to win the deal. And ultimately, it hurts the whole team or hurts the reputation. And this is one of the things I can't comment on how Collective OS would change this, but I can tell you about something that we did at Chameleon Collective that I think is unique to our culture that really stopped a lot of this kind of behavior. So within our organization, I mentioned earlier how we all kind of, every pun intended, kind of collectively own the business. We also have this kind of decentralized leadership structure. So we don't have a formal hierarchy. We use a derivative of management style called holacracy. And so it effectively means that we have a free-flowing leadership structure that reorganizes around who owns the client relationship. We are a company with no managers and no employees, whether you have been a C-suite level person in the past or you are a art director. We all are equal within the collective. And so when you don't have a manager, it forces basically a personal accountability. And so one of the things I really love in our model is when, at least and again, I can't speak to the broader industry, but I can just tell you about how we're trying to change it. When we put together an SOW or proposal for a client, every single member that is working on that proposal is personally responsible for putting their estimates in. And then if they misestimate their component, they are personally accountable to deliver against it, whether they misquote or not. Now, in our model, our economics, we disproportionately reward people for accepting that level of risk. So we almost think of ourselves like everyone is an entrepreneur in Chameleon Collective. You say, hey, you want the upside? We're going to pay you more than anyone else pays out in the market. But if you want that, you can't just skip the downside. The downside is personal, you have to be personally accountable and you've got to deliver on whatever you basically said you were going to do. And so what I find is now when we go out there and we put these deals together, we'll go back to that one we mentioned a second ago, no one on our team would kind of lowball their component because they know they're going to be personally accountable for it. And I think that's pretty cool. So I'd say that, maybe we see at Chameleon Collectors, someone might do it one time and then they reap the repercussions of that, and then shocking, they get pretty damn good at estimating after that. I think, I can think about my old agency days where like, I come in and ask for people for numbers. I can literally, I have visions of like certain people, like developers, like they're typing, they're using a mouse. I'm like, what do you think the estimate is? 32 hours, and they just keep working. I'm like, they don't care. They were on salary. Like, they're like totally whiffing these things. They were just guessing, but it just didn't matter. You know what I mean? But when someone gets personally accountable for their own hours one time, amazing how good people get at estimating after that. So,
So there's a fun adage in our industry, and maybe not everybody knows it, but we've been around long enough to probably have heard it, which is that every marketer gets the agency they deserve, right? And of course that's the double-edged sword there, right? Because if they're very bad at agency selection, they get a very bad agency that's a poor fit. Perhaps potentially they're just shopping on price or whatever it is. There's so many ways you can screw up an agency selection process. So I'd love to hear your comments on, does that remain equally true in the future? Do you think, do you feel like CMOs and senior leaders on the client side are getting better at picking agencies, or are they equally poor at it as they were previously in so many cases?
that's a great question. It's very interesting now. The world is changed, right? So I feel like there's one part of where I think of marketing is just so much more complex than it used to be. So, the people, you've got choices between agencies that try and do it all, or you have a multitude of specialist agencies that people are trying to like, figure it out, going through the mix to figure it out. At the same time, you're starting to see like where used to have these like agency reviews and firms that specialized in help managing the review process. Now you're seeing technology platforms that are like matchmaking with the agency world. It's funny, I think with all the different things that we've added in, I'm not sure we're any better or any worse at it. I think a lot of it comes down to people's good intuition. And I think a really good I think I'd say intuition and also some discipline. I think a good marketing leader, a good CMO is going out there and really trying to cut through the BS and pick people on merit and do proper diligence and not do things impulsively. And then there are a lot of people that maybe either don't have a good eye for BS and or impulsive and that I'm sure they're costing their companies a lot of money and pain at the end of the day. So
How should marketers think about factoring in opportunity cost when they make their decisions, right? Because that's
mm,
the hardest thing to quantify, is the difference in upside between choices A, B, and C. You can see their costs pretty easily. Costs of A, B, and C are transparent. They're in the proposal
yeah.
that came as a result of either an RFP or just something that came in over the transom. But often making the wrong decision is more about missing the opportunity cost of having made one decision versus the other.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I would say I'm going to put my marketer hat on here. So yes, I've been running a professional services firm and I've been spent a lot of time in that space, but because I've also been an interim leader the last I've been a CMO twice full time, and I think either CMO or CDO another 5 times now through Chameleon Collective through various private equity backed companies. And I feel like when people start to evaluate the opportunity cost, both something I've considered and I know some of the other leaders at CC have, um, it can be a pretty tricky path, right? Because you're playing chess at this point.
Yeah.
And what I mean by chess, you're having to look multiple steps ahead. I think that having people that are come from a real business background is really handy. Some of the dangers we've seen with some the marketing leaders that we work with, and actually, and I mean this with a great respect to my friends in the industry, but I find that sometimes if people have had too narrow a scope and maybe worked exclusively with inside an agency or a professional services firm, maybe it's their first time as a full-time leader. And I want to be clear, I was in that position too when I did my first CMO role. I didn't have enough understanding and visibility of understanding how decisions I was making in marketing was impacting different parts of the business. So, whether that was, understanding the impact on the sales team and things that might be, causing impact multiple steps down. In, direct to consumer businesses I've had worked in, considering the impact on operations and manufacturing. And so, understanding, lead times and product development times. So, I think, really when you're making a decision where it may feel like, oh, it's the CMO should be in charge of that, and it's a marketing decision. I do think with things that are as profound as potentially picking an agency or making major strategic changes in your marketing, actually maybe take a minute to grab a quick coffee with some of your peers in the leadership team and just sanity check. First off, I think they'd appreciate it. I think it's a great way to earn the respect of your peers and make sure that they feel heard and that you're a true team, because that's the nature of a leadership team. I think people don't think about that enough. And it's a surefire way to make sure that you really do consider some of the other opportunity costs that may be there in long-term strategy.
One of the other things I hear, sometimes it's not admitted as much as it should be, but particularly on the media buying side of the agency ecosystem, there seems to be a bit of a thinking that it's really a commodity, right? There's no big difference between agencies A, B, and C or teams A, B, and C. But I find on a practical basis, there's often a strong double-digit difference between teams A, B, and C. But there's this sort of skepticism on the CMO side that really is true. How do we address that as an industry or as professional services firms where people are making promises that they can't deliver on the one side, and then other folks are actually really, really great, maybe conservative in the estimates that they provide?
I think, look, with media buying, one part of this may be down to relationships and the ability to buy things at desirable rates and so on, and there could be some impact there. But I do think there's a major impact when it comes down to execution.
Yeah.
And you can see double digit, sometimes even high double digit, impact or even more by how one firm, approaches something versus another. And so I would absolutely say that, even in areas that things that may appear commoditized, I think having people that can properly execute goes a long way. I mean, you can absolutely have the B and the C or the D team doing your work. And I don't think it has anything to do with being, onshore, offshore, anything like that. I think it's just having high quality people. And honestly, especially in media, one of the biggest dangers I've seen is that they get in kind of hot and heavy in the beginning, do a ton of big strategic thinking and really make a strong effort, to kind of get things set up the right way. And they may be even pretty good at optimization for maybe the first 6 months, or even maybe 8 or 9 months. But then there's this area where they get really, really lax because they kind of think they've used all of their tricks. And I would argue the real measure of a great media partner is people that can still keep finding ways to test and learn. And even if even if it's just experimenting, if you hit a place where I feel like you've hit, peak optimization, then start experimenting with some new ideas. Don't let your media company rest on its laurels. because they're going to think they're printing money, but like you got to keep pushing them. And I think it's the best advice I can give people.
So one question that I had, and this is a philosophical question I see client side and to some extent agency side as well, is this idea of AOR versus solving the problem that the client knows that they have. Because often
Mm.
there's problems or missed opportunities they don't know about that are discovered. But there's sort of a psychological hurdle, I think, of handing the keys to an agency and saying, okay, you get to drive my success or my failure, right? As an AOR versus, oh, I need help with, you know, paid digital media, or I need help with SEO, or I need help with direct mail, whatever, and solving the problem that they feel that they have.
Mm.
Any thoughts on that as to what the pros and cons are for, the way people should think about that on the client side?
Yeah. I'm always a bit skeptical of how people address some of these relationships. So I think when people kind of outsource the entire media strategy and they're doing, I see people sometimes put an AOR in, and it's because they basically have no internal capabilities on this front at all.
Right.
And it's like, and they're like, well, I don't have anything, but it can do anything, so I'm gonna completely trust the agency. I think that gets into really dangerous territory, personally.
Right.
I think that it's lunatics running the asylum kind of, classic story. I think you're setting yourself up for a disaster. I think a great partnership where you've got a great agency and you've got a great internal team, even if you've only got one great media person inside the marketing teams, maybe the CMO is that person. If they're not, then maybe the CMO is more brand centric, as an example, or e-commerce centric. You've got all kinds of different flavors of marketing leaders these days. I think making sure you've got someone inside that can not meet with the agency, but actually manage them, is an imperative. Otherwise, you're gonna it's worth, depending on what your media budgets are, reducing your agency budget a bit, and making sure you can hire someone internally to hold them accountable. Otherwise, I think it will, unless you get very lucky, I think will eventually run astray. So,
Yeah.
you know what? Because there's going to be some other client the agency has who has got that person who's going to be the squeaky wheel, and the energy is going to go to that person. And if you're just kind of checking in every week and going, great, then you're not the squeaky wheel, and the energy is going to go to the people that are pushing them for that energy.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and it's, I think, the reason that companies of a certain size have in-house counsel and external law firms as well, right? Is you need the expertise internally to be able
Mhm.
to know if your external teams are doing a good job or not. And if you don't have the expertise to judge the efficiency and effectiveness of the external teams and even their subject matter expertise, then you're flying completely blind. So, final question is really along the lines of, what else should we have discussed today as it relates to the future of marketing that we didn't discuss?
It's a great question. I do think, how can you have a chat these days without referencing something in the AI world? But you think, it is something that, as a person who's, a diehard innovation guy, and I'm always trying to sit at the forefront. I think that some people may think that AI is a hype bubble. I actually want to tell people that I actually think it's underhyped. And I don't, and I think that there is a healthy amount of this technology that is will kind of turn you into a superhuman. I do think that everyone in our industry needs to basically immerse themselves in this technology, whether you are a creative person, whether you're a writer, whether you're a biz dev person or an account person. Um, I think I simultaneously I want to acknowledge that I'm actually scared about the long-term impact of how this is going to impact jobs and employment. One of the things that concerns me the most is, we're seeing a lot of shifts with our clients, and even our own behavior, where we're able to use AI technologies for what would effectively replace, like, lower grade employees. But, for those of us who've come up through the industry over the last couple of decades, I had to do that work at one point in my career because that's how I got to this point of my career. And I'm really concerned about what happens when, everyone's go, well, just have the AI do it. Well, how do the people get to the mid grade and the upper grade if we're giving all the low grade work to some AI tech? And then honestly, this is where, and I'll just use ChatGPT as a reference. So this is where ChatGPT 4.0 is. I am nervous about what 5 or 6 could look like. And even in their own predictions, artificial general intelligence will probably come to bear in the next 5 or 6 years. So I have concerns about the impact it's going to have on our industry, would be a mild way of saying it. In the short term, I think it's an imperative that people learn how to use these technologies to remain competitive. I think it's it's an imperative for people to be successful in business right now. It cannot be ignored. Um, but I worry for the future. I worry about what this does to some of the younger generations, and maybe I'm, unnecessarily, fear mongering or whatever. But I think maybe a little healthy paranoia is a good motivation, to have people, spend time in these technologies. I would say that if you're one of those people that maybe took a peek at it and said, "Oh, it's cool. It can write blog posts or something," um, it's iterating past that rapidly.
Yeah.
And so I'd strongly suggest that people, whether they take a news alert or they don't get numb to all the AI news, keep reading it. For those of us who again remember, like let's say when the iPhone came out, or in my case, I was very much there at the birth of the internet. I was able to use that to great effect to build a lot of successful businesses, mercifully, and I'm thankful for that. I was there, when mobile rose up and was able to use that as successfully to build a business. This is just not one of those things you want to miss. Um, but I do think this one's going to be even bigger and even more impactful. And that, someone said to me, Freddie, don't be so nervous about, where these technologies are going. Look, we've had, the Industrial Revolution came out. It didn't replace us or whatever, but I think all the other things, these technologies we've seen that just were going to disrupt our industries, they were tools for humans to use. And I think some people could argue AI is a tool for us to use, but I think it's also a replacement for us. And that's the bit that makes me a little bit nervous. But it seems kind of crazy to say, look, I think even though I'm scared of it, I feel like it's like nuclear arms. It's like I feel like you've got to arm up, or you're going to be at a disadvantage. And hopefully, some people come in with some good sense and figure this out as we're barreling head first into the future. So sorry to end on a little bit of a nervous Nelly note, but I do think it's something that people need to be thinking about seriously.
Yeah, for sure. It's transformative, and I don't think we're able to look far enough into the future where we know quite how transformative it will be and the way in which the transformation will manifest itself. So yeah, you have to be a little bit nervous when you have that level of power
Mm,
bubbling up at high speed, not in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion. So yeah,
100%.
I share some of your concern, but excitement at the same time.
Same here. So I can tell you this, in the short term, I'm having a blast with it, and I'm probably going to use it to help make a lot of money for a lot of folks. But I do think it's we really got to keep a close eye on this, because I'm not, while I might be the a quintessential capitalist, I also don't, I think we got to do something that's sustainable, and so it's sustainable and not just for a small group of people, but for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, Freddie, thanks so much for joining me. This is a blast to catch up and talk about the future and the things that you have cooking. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Hey, it was great. Thank you again, Kevin.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.